Welcome to the Nature of Nature, Story, Science and Soul. This is a fabulous event brought to you by Inspiring South Australia as part of Nature Festival South Australia. I'm Sophie Thomson and I'm your host for this fascinating panel discussion where we explore the idea of nature, why it's important, our connection to it, our stories and our dreams. First off, I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're gathered here today on the land that's the traditional lands of the Kaurna people. They're custodians of these lands and the waters of the Adelaide region where we meet tonight. We respect their elders, past and present, and we acknowledge and respect the Kaurna people's cultural, spiritual, physical and community, emotional connection with their lands, waters and community. Tonight we have a wonderful panel of experts to discuss this topic, and we're going to get into some deep questions. We've got the leading scientists, we've got explorers, we've got cultural curators, and we're going to look at the natural world around us that supports us and inspires us. Now, first off, I'm going to read the bios of each of the expert panel members. Professor Chris Daniels. Chris is the chair of the Green Adelaide Landscape Board and is Chief Executive Officer of the International Koala Centre of Excellence. He is Adjunct Professor of Biology in the School of Pharmacy and Medicine Sciences at UniSA and Adjunct Professor of Zoology at Adelaide University. He is also involved in many other environmental leadership activities focused on conserving wildlife and connecting people with nature. Chris has published 9 books, 1 DVD, and over 250 scientific and community publications. Books include Adelaide, The Nature of a City, and Adelaide, Water of a City. Chris won the South Australian Premier's Science Award for Communication in 2007 and the Medal for Natural History from the Field Naturalist Society of South Australia in 2010. He received a Doctor of Science from Adelaide University in 2019. Next off we have Sarah Sutter. Sarah has been the CEO of Nature Play SA since its inception in 2014. The vision for Nature Play SA is simple: to inspire the South Australian community to engage children in nature through outdoor learning and play. During Sarah's leadership, Nature Play South Australia has grown rapidly and is today a respected South Australian organisation driving a powerful community movement. Prior to her working life, Sarah was an elite athlete. Sarah represented her country in netball and has achieved every title a netballer could dream of: Commonwealth gold medalist, world champion, national champion, and was the vice captain of the inaugural Adelaide Thunderbirds. In Sarah's spare time, she loves spending time at Black Point with her family and can be seen squidding off her stand-up paddleboard. Next off, we have Dr. Jared Thomas. Jared is a Nookana person of the Southern Flinders Ranges and the William and Margaret Geary Curator of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Art and Material Cultural at the South Australian Museum. A member of the Nookana Wabmadora Aboriginal Corporation, Jared has led and been involved with land management programs, including cultural burns and revegetation projects for most of his life. Jared is an international award-winning author. His works of theatre and fiction explore issues relating to Aboriginal marginalisation and resistance, the environment, gender and sexuality. Next off we have Erin Fowler. She holds a deep understanding of movement and dance. Social issues such as feminism and the environment are themes that run through her creative projects and her practice as a dancer. She is a teacher of holistic modalities, Koya and Tantra. Erin is also the founder of the Gaia Movement, a new organisation with tree planting at its core. The Gaia Movement aims to inspire hope and encourage community shifts required to make lasting positive change for the planet through creative, tangible, practicable and simple actions that anyone, anywhere can take part in. The Gaia Movement does this through educational resources and schools programs, social campaigns and arts projects. Their inaugural project, Tree Pose for the Planet, launched last weekend as part of the Nature Festival. And finally, Tim Jarvis AM. Tim is an environmental scientist, author adventurer and public speaker with a master's degree in environmental science and environmental law. He is committed to finding pragmatic solutions to major environmental issues related to climate change and biodiversity loss. Tim has undertaken unsupported exhibitions to the world's remotest regions, including the South Pole, High Arctic, and across the Great Victorian Desert, and is well known for his historically authentic recreations of the Antarctic survival journeys of heroic era explorers Sir Douglas Mawson and Sir Ernest Shackleton. His environmental project 250 aims to raise awareness of climate change by focusing on the world's disappearing equatorial glaciers. Tim also heads up the Fork Tree Project, a native revegetation and rewilding project on South Australia's Fleurieu Peninsula, and is Global Ambassador and Governor for the World Wildlife Fund for Nature. So as you can tell, we've got an amazing panel. I'm going to ask them all the same question, which is what is nature to you and why is it important? But I'm going to start off by saying that as a gardener, nature is everything to me. Nature and gardening and plants feed me physically, and they also feed my soul. And being outside in my garden or outside in nature is also my therapy. But starting with you, Chris, what is nature to you?
It's an incredible question, Soph, and actually I would agree with everything that you said. But I was at a meeting today with some business people, and one business leader kept saying, in the real world, and you've got to be in my world, if you live in the real world, this is what we have to do. And he was expounding about the real world, which we were to interpret as the world of business, the cutthroat, the right to make money, the right to progress. And I was thinking, that's not the real world. That is a world, and it is a world that we all live in part, but it's not the real world. The real world is nature. It is that supports us, that surrounds us, that nurtures us, that provides us with all that we need to live. We can get by without money if we absolutely had to, but we can't get by without air, water, food, and without the feeling that nature provides us. So to me, what is nature? It's the real world.
Love it. Now, Sarah, what's nature to you and why is it important?
Nature to me, it's my survival tool. I mean, all my life I've been connected to nature, and I think we've all been very disconnected to nature. And I think, you know, it's so important that we have nature in our life. And for me personally, I don't think I'd be here without the connection of nature.
Now, Jared, what's nature to you and why is it important?
I've just returned from the Southern Flinders Ranges from home. And nature is my safety. So it provides confidence, it nurtures, it enables me to feel safe. So from an Ukana perspective, you may have heard people refer to Mother Earth. In Ukana, we don't talk about Mother Earth. We talk about the earth being the same as us. So entities, trees, animals, rocks, etc., they're not a separate entity, they're an extension of energy. So we are one and the same. So for me, being able to know where water is, particular foods, just being able to survive at home, it provides this incredible strength.
Erin, what's nature to you?
Probably echoing a lot of what's been said, but I guess first of all, nature is inspiration for a lot of the work that I do in my life. I also think it's a haven and I guess a respite to most of the way I spend my life, which is doing, being, you know, maybe this real world that the person was talking about and as soon as I take a breath and come back into nature, it's a haven, a regrounding.
Now for you, Tim, why is nature important?
Well, I think, you know, in life, so much of who you think you are as a person is really defined by the interactions you have with people. You're either a parent or a sibling or an employee or a boss, and you tend to frame everything within the human context, whereas I think when you go out into the wilds where there is no human societal infrastructure around you, you can really be yourself. Whatever emerges when you put yourself in these remote places is really the closest thing you can get to the real you. So nature for me is like really meeting an old friend again. It's really that part of yourself that emerges when you put yourself in these remote places where there's no one around to tell you who you are.
Wow, very diverse views, but all the same. It's interesting. Okay, so Chris, I'm going to ask a different question of each panel member now. And you're a scientist who has worked in environmental sciences for many, many years. What can you tell us about the relationship between humanity and nature, bearing in mind that we're part of nature, but we've forgotten that?
Well, the relationship between humanity and nature has really, for particularly most of the last 10 to 15,000 years around the world, been appalling, really, since the agricultural revolution and the move to creation of cities and stable single location occupations. We have separated ourselves from nature, and we have viewed nature as something that is at our beck and call and that we can use for whatever purpose we want, whether it be for food and for clothing or for hunting, for fun, for whatever. It was secondary to what we wanted to do. And really, over the vast majority of the world's history, recent history, we have set about exterminating and clearing nature. Some recent work by the World Wildlife Fund has shown that since 1970, the population of animals has fallen by 68%. So by 2/3 since I was 10. You know, if you went back further, it would be even more horrifying. We are in the middle of the Anthropocene. There's major level of extinction, the 6th great world extinction. So we have been really dreadful, and much of that is because we've become disconnected and we have lost the understanding of the importance of nature. But that has also changed. Humanity has changed its views recently, and it's a growing movement. And I think we see that with Nature Play as a result of the book by Richard Loeb. And I know that Sarah will talk about that, about the fact that he'd noticed children are not actually spending time in nature. There was also some really important seminal work from Stephen Kellett and Edward O. Wilson on the biophilia hypothesis that demonstrated that people need that connection with nature. They need it not just to provide the basic elements of life, but also for our physical and mental well-being. And getting out and about in nature was incredibly important to us as individuals. It's why people go to the beach to relax. It's why they like to walk on the sand. It's why they buy holiday homes, you know, over either tree changing or sea changing. So that has become recognised. And then, of course, in the COVID era, these last 1 year, 6, 8 months a year, people have really connected with nature. When you're forced to stay at home, then you start going out into the garden with your kids and planting your veggies. You start walking the parks. You start talking to people. There was a big rush on buying dogs because everyone was out there walking. And so they were discovering nature in their own backyard. And I think we're starting to realise we've made a really serious mistake in excluding nature. And that mistake is because we've hurt nature, and through that we've hurt ourselves, and we've lost that sense of who we are. So I would say there's a lot coming forward now about the relationship between humanity and nature that is different from our immediate past.
Now, Sarah, you've been involved with Nature Play more or less since its inception. What have you learnt about the relationship, particularly with children, but really Nature Play is for adults too?
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. So, you know, as Chris said, you know, Richard Loeb wrote this book, you know, Last Child in the Woods, and it really talked about children who have a nature deficit to children who have a nature deficit, and that's what we've really seen over the last 7 years. And we know our children are not getting outside. We know they're not connected to nature. There's a number of reasons why, and you know, we know it's a technology. We know that the iPad's only been around for 22 years. We know that, you know, there's parents who are risk averse and don't want their children to go out. You know, and children don't have access to nature as much as what we did as children. You know, we had creeks in our backyards, had all these amazing trees and that. So, you know, we've now having to bring, as an organisation, that really back into our children's lives. Because when years, you know, as we shouldn't say this, but, you know, 30, 40 years ago when we were kids, we were down those creeks, we were collecting those tadpoles, we were up those trees watching the birds and, you know, and all the different species. And when we were doing that, we were learning about the life cycle of the tadpole into the frog. We were taking those risks, climbing those trees, and, you know, over there, Tim's the adventurer. I'm sure that he did all of those amazing experiences of climbing trees, going over logs and, you know, doing amazing stuff outside. And, you know, our children aren't experiencing that at the moment, and it's really crucial we put that back into their lives. And once we get them outside, they will understand the beauty of nature as well. And we need to get them outside first to experience it, and then we actually need to really connect them. So that's part of our job as well, is connecting our children to the environment, so one day that they will actually, you know, look after it as well. You know, as a society, we've got a long way to go, but you know, we're making small steps and we're seeing it. And I think, as Chris said, during COVID-19, we've seen that importance of, you know, our children need to get outside. They've experienced, you know, this upheaval of their world, and we've seen them at the beaches, we've seen them in the national parks, and we've seen the family unit come back together. And I think that's really, really important as a society. We've really changed as a society. Sophie, you've met my grandmother, who was 102, and she was an avid gardener, and you know, she didn't work. She was with my mother, who, you know, looked after her, and then my mum had me, and now I'm a full-time worker, so I don't have that time to take my children outside and, you know, teach them about the environment, about fishing and about squidding. But, you know, as a mum, I have to prioritise it in to get our children outside, and as a society, that's where we are, which is a shame. But if we make those small moves, we will get those kids connected to nature again, and we'll be like all of us who are very, very passionate about environment, because we need our children to look after the environment.
You're running wonderful schools programs too, and they have the ability to influence children at school, and then when they go home, they can even take their parents outside, because some parents need a...
Oh, and we all need it, Sophie. We all need, you know, that to say stop. We need to put it back into our lives, because we're all rushing around the technology 24/7, phones beeping, and we need to stop, and we need to connect back to land, all of us.
Now, Jared, different cultures have different relationships with nature. What do you see as the differences between, say, European and Australian Aboriginals' relationship with nature?
Okay, well, I think firstly there are some similarities between European cultures, just that there's been a rapid shift, and a disconnect, which I'll get back to in a moment. But you know, the oldest continuous living culture on the planet, and I think the real difference with Aboriginal Australia is the status of story relating to food and medicine, that person that is looking after country the best has a higher status. So within a pre-colonial world, people sharing stories, so that person that is the storyteller, they would be like the Xbox. So the kids flocking around this person to hear science that is integrated within these really engaging dramas, these great sagas, these stories, where kids get to learn about all these different entities within their environment. So I think it's something about the status of story and the focus on protection of people and protection of country. So, you know, and punishment surrounding that. Like if you were breaking those laws in a traditional context, you are punished. If you're not seen to be someone that retains knowledge, that goes through a rite of passage to acquire that knowledge, which is all about protecting country. If I were to look today at any kind of mainstream media, you would see people highly regarded. Status is all about acquisition of wealth, and that often comes at the exploitation of people and planet. Within an Aboriginal context, that would be punished. But I think, you know, if we were going back to, because I have European ancestry as well, pretty obvious, but, you know, I think maybe 10 generations ago, our ancestors would have been living in a similar fashion. So having a great knowledge of pharmacopoeia, of the environment around them, having myth, story that helps children and people within communities navigate these landscapes. So knowing how to protect things. You know, Aboriginal people are phenologists, we're scientists, we're studying the interrelationship between animals and plants, seasonal change, climate, etc. And I think, before the scientific revolution, enlightenment, the agrarianism, like people would have been living in a similar fashion to how Aboriginal people how many of us continue to live.
What do you think we could do to change how we live on this land?
Well, if I had the magic wand, one of the things that I would do is when a child is born in this country, I would have kind of like a database of ecology that is in crisis, or ecology within that region. So if you're born in Adelaide, you would be appointed with a totem, just as Aboriginal people are. So that could be the squid, or the whiting, or the possum, or a particular flower. And as a child, if you have that totem, it's compulsory that you learn about that particular species, so that you're integrated in the knowledge, like the interrelationship between birds that spread seeds, that help to protect that particular ecology. Yeah, so I think that would be one way to transform, and for people to really be mindful of that interdependence with nature, which I think is really lacking.
Okay, now Erin, as someone that's heavily involved in the creative arts and wellness, what is it about nature that inspires you?
It's a good question. I think a lot of my work over the last few years has been exploring this concept around embodiment. So I trained as a dancer and more from a performative kind of space, but then really started to think about what it is to be in the body. And, you know, we live in a world that values, you know, operating from here up a lot of the time. We're very mental constructed. I work a little bit with academics a lot, and even just encouraging them to move their body for 5 minutes, for a moment, to even acknowledge that they have a body, can be quite a big leap in the way we operate. And so for me, the natural world and embodiment are very intertwined. If we come into presence in our own body and realise that we are moving, living, cyclical beings, that extension to the natural world as well, that's my, I guess that's my inspiration point into it. And so I work a lot in that area of encouraging people, you know, that you can't not be embodied when you're in amazing sights of nature, when you're in front of a waterfall, when you're at the beach. The impulse is to move. You don't analyse the beach from a mental state. It's an embodied experience, and I think our disconnect to embodied experiences and our lack of valuing of that also is our disconnect to nature.
Fabulous. And the tree pose, where did the inspiration for that come from?
I guess from that exact thing, I'm really passionate. I guess as an artist, I'm often having to advocate for the importance and the place of the arts in a world that values the mental, and there's definitely a place for that. So already I spend a lot of my time arguing for something that is ephemeral, that is you know, not necessarily as tangible. So with Tree Pose for the Planet, this campaign, it was going, you know, something simple that somebody could do in their backyard with their iPhone. By doing tree pose, they realise that they wobble, that they balance, that the floor underneath them is there. You know, these things that happen when you have a body and you move it. But by also being the tree, you know, you're embodying that is the tree, and realising actually we're not that different. We breathe, we exhale, we inhale, and I guess just that simple shift of perspective is what I've been trying to create with the program.
A great idea. Now, Tim, you've explored remote nature, far from the comforts of home, and obviously, I would imagine many times you've been challenged by nature's powers. Tell us about the power of nature and how that makes you feel.
Well, I mean, it makes you feel insignificant. Frankly, I find it wonderful to experience places that have not been subjugated by people. I mean, humans occupy about 10% of the land of the planet physically, but the other 90% we influence so heavily that we may as well physically be occupying those spaces. So it's wonderful to go to places where we don't have control. Nature, frankly, doesn't care what humans do. From a, you know, looking at things at a kind of philosophical perspective, it's just that we have this very large footprint that we impose upon it. So I love going to these places because I think it allows you to reacquaint with a different version of yourself almost at a personal level. But I go there on expeditions really to try and bring back images of the fragility and the beauty of these places so that others can think to be maybe more accountable in their own lives for protecting them. There's no us and them, it's just us. and we all have a role to play in trying to protect it.
Do you think that as humans we have this idea that we're in control? We've got dominion over nature, whereas actually nature's in control.
For sure. I mean, anybody would think if you listen to talking heads on even the most erudite, radio talkback shows or political shows or business reports that that nature and the planet were just a subset of the human economy. But of course, the human economy is very evidently just a small subset of everything else, of which we are just one small part ourselves. So I get incensed when I hear this endless talk of growth and the measure of growth. Interestingly, if anybody who's listening or watching feels inclined, they should look at the speech that Bobby Kennedy wrote in 1968 on gross national product, GNP, and he says it measures everything that we don't value, but very few of the things that we genuinely value, the strength of our friendships and our families and our discourse and our emotional well-being, but it measures things like the locks on our doors and the jails for the people that break the laws, and it measures all of those things, but none of the things we really value.
Please.
Question, Tim, because one of the things that we have always come up with is people's fear of nature, or they're frightened for their kids, they're frightened to go out because the moment you go outside you'll get sunburned, skin cancer and die, you'll be attacked by snakes, the spiders will rip your face off. Don't go outside because nature's out to get you. But you're probably the one who has experienced nature in its most terrifying. How have you found or dealt with the terrifying aspects of nature?
Well, I've done this sort of stuff all the way through. I mean, I grew up as a small child in Malaysia, and my parents would, my brother is a lot younger than me, so it was just me in the beginning, the first 6 years, and they would say, off you go and see you at 5 sort of thing. And I had my run-ins with snakes and spiders and wild dogs and monkeys and things like that falling out of trees. And I think a lot of those experiences allow you, which is very much a central sort of thesis of the whole nature play idea, to better assess risk and be more resilient as a person and have formative life experiences as a kid in nature in a place that has no straight lines, that is not built for us, where if we fall out of a tree there isn't a rubber mat to catch us, and it teaches us to navigate all of the things in life that we will need to have as skill sets when we reach adulthood. And I think more people need to do it as children to make them better adults.
It also makes us who we are. I mean, you think about the fact that we all have redback spiders in our house, and for us, that's not a problem. We squash them or put them outside or collect them, and we've all collected huntsmen off our walls, the big hairy spiders, and we're kind of proud of it. And when I've talked about that as an example, usually South Australians start to smile. They'll think of the time when they caught the huntsman and put it out. When I talk to people from a range of other places around the world and say, yeah, we got big hairy spiders in our house, they look at me like I'm insane, and how could you possibly live in a place with big hairy spiders or bitey poisonous ones like redbacks? But that's made us who we are. That's given us that point of difference. Yes, we do, and we don't think twice about it. We are connected with nature exactly as you were saying, and that gives us that sense of difference from people from elsewhere, from other locations where they don't have any connection with nature. And creating that sense of place is incredibly important and powerful.
From an evolutionary perspective, we've grown up as creatures that had larger brains than most of the rest, and we haven't used it very well, but that's the reality of it. And that's the way we've developed as a species. We know our place. We know there are things that are more dangerous than us out there, and technology and the smarts have given us the upper hand. But we need to know that those dangerous elements are still out there.
Yeah.
I mean, in Scotland, where I spend a bit of time, my mother is from there, and they're talking about reintroducing wolves, and there are farmers saying, well, we don't want wolves to eat our sheep, but the rest of the population are saying, wouldn't it be wonderful to think there is this dangerous species out there that we haven't controlled, and it's there, and it's part of the human psyche to know it's there. It's
part of the thrill of nature.
I think kids have instruction manuals to all of these different kind of things that are dangerous, or instruction manuals for technology, whether it be iPhones, iPads, televisions, different bikes or motorbikes or whatever that kids are given. There's all these things that are dangerous. Skateboards, most kids grow up riding skateboards, BMX bikes, mountain bikes, scooters, broken arms, left, right and centre. But yeah, our kids aren't given those instruction manuals to engage with country. And I think, again, like looking at the dreaming, it's a set of stories that help you navigate a particular landscape. So back home, you know, there's king browns and there's tiger snakes and there's white pointer sharks and stingrays and jellyfish, numerous species of spider, you know, all these like, scorpions, goannas, you know, galder, sleepy lizards that latch on, they don't let go. So there's all of these dangerous animals, but, you know, these stories help you navigate that place, keep safe, know how to avoid things and know how to interact. So it actually, again, providing that sense of comfort. You know, like I surf and people are always saying, aren't you scared of sharks? And it's like, well, if I'd just rather die getting eaten by a shark than missing out on all that pleasure that being in the ocean surfing brings me. So I think it's the same. Like if we're restricting our kids from nature because there's snakes and lizards and all the things I listed, we're really disadvantaging our kids. Like we're cutting them off from all of those good things that we take from the environment.
And I know, Sarah, from being involved with Nature Play early on, that when Nature Play South Australia started, the statistics for Australian kids were that only 1 in 4 had ever climbed a tree, and yet they get a driver's licence, well, learners at 16, and they haven't got the gross motor skills necessarily or the fine motor skills. So,
yeah, or the risk taking as well, and you know, all of those, what you've just said there is, you know, is risk taking, and kids need to learn how to fail. I mean, we all need to learn how to fail. That builds resilience.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm going to ask you each to tell me about a nature experience that has affected you deeply or changed you in some way. And I'll start with you, Chris.
Well, I'm lucky enough to have spent all my life really travelling the world and seeing so many wonderful pieces of nature, and every one has changed me greatly. So I guess I can start off when I was 8 and just keep talking to now, because every experience with nature is wonderful. But I think the thing that, if there was one, it actually came after watching David Attenborough's Life on Earth, where he had that experience with the gorillas and sitting there, and watching on the television was amazing. But I got to go to Rwanda and do a very similar thing and sit there. And one of the things that he mentioned there was to look into the eyes of these animals. And so I'd always worked with animals, collected them since I was 5, and always had them. But that's when I first started to look in the eye of a gorilla. And that's an amazing thing when you stop. And it's actually kind of the thing that Erin was talking about, that you start to see the animal not just as an animal, but that it's looking at you, it's thinking about you, it's making decisions about you. And its body language starts to tell you about its reaction to you. So looking into its eyes means you start to look at its behaviour and at all of its body language and what might it be doing, how's it processing, and so you start to get connected to the animal. And so really, since that one experience, I've really taken to looking into the eyes of animals. You can do it with your dog and your cat, and you can learn a lot about that. Then you try it with your budgie and then do it with wild animals. But you start to look at them as sentient beings, as thinking organisms that make decisions and that interact. And that was that seminal moment with the gorillas in Rwanda. It wasn't just because they're utterly amazing, but because you start to really understand that these are sentient beings that have as much right to be here as we do, if not more in many ways.
Wow, very profound. Sarah, what would an experience be for you that's changed you deeply?
It's probably only the last 7 years I've actually really understood what nature has done for my mental health. And it's really funny, when I was dropped from the Australian team, you know, I was just absolutely gutted. I'd always go back to Black Point. I'd always go to the end of the point and, you know, be surrounded by, you know, just sit on the sand and look at the ocean. And that used to heal me. And then I remember having young Tom and didn't realise then I had postnatal depression, but I had a really bad time when I was living in the US. And I used to walk, and I used to go into the woods. And that used to calm me. And it's probably not you know, it's now that I really understand why I was gravitating there, because it was healing my mental health. And I think that's what I've really, really learnt as a person, is that how it's kept me alive at times. And, you know, I'm so grateful for this, you know, being able to have nature to sit here today.
Wonderful. Now, Jared, for yourself?
Yeah, I guess with my people, or like most Aboriginal people, as a consequence of colonisation, a lot of our people were placed in missions, institutions, and didn't have access to our country, and therefore, you know, pastoralism expanding. So people were kind of fenced out of country and couldn't care for country. And within the last decade, we've been able to start conducting cultural burns again on tracts of land. So just being with my dad and my uncles when we're doing cultural burns on country. So one of the first times we did that was to start looking at the replenishment of Acacia victoria, like a wattle within a particular tract of land. And yeah, just starting to perform this burning in autumn, and just start to see the wildew, the eagle hawks, soar above us, and just a pleasure on my dad and my uncle's face, and their sense of joy, where they're saying, you know, Nakaja Namana Wildew, like, here comes Uncle Eagle. He's happy with us. He's pleased about what we're doing here. And I'm looking at this at Wildew, and I'm thinking, he's also looking at all these little rodents and lizards and everything shooting off from the fire. And then thinking about the smoke and how that smoke was drifting over to other plants and opening up seeds. And then to come back following the winter and just see that whole reinvigoration of country. So all these species that come back on tracts of land that have been sheep grazing country. So for me, being part of that experience, thinking about self-esteem and the need for people to actually care for country and how that creates pride. And, you know, it's cyclical. It's all, yeah, that interconnection. So wildew kind of fattening up on those particular animals, being an apex predator, seed distribution, smoke, just cleansing of country, the soil's refreshed. Yeah, so for me, that, you know, that's been an amazing thing to do. And, you know, it's really sad to think my dad and my uncles and cousins haven't had that for most of their life. Mm-hmm. But we're finally able to start being part of these cultural practices again.
Thank you. Erin, for yourself, is there a particular experience?
I mean, I guess more broadly, nature always brings out this sort of sense of reverence in me. I wouldn't call myself religious, but nature is kind of this place which I can most closely equate to some kind of reverent feeling. But I was filming on Lake Gardner about 6 years ago. I was making an environmental dance film called Gaia, where I was embodying this kind of Mother Earth character, and we'd got up at 6:30. It was a 40-degree day and low budget filmmaking. We had 12 hours to shoot, so we shot all day. I think I had some kind of heat stroke by the end of the day, and I'd been having this quite reverent experience portraying Gaia, and then it was a full moon and we wrapped up the shoot, and somebody had the idea that the four of us in the team would each pick a direction, close our eyes and just run. And it was like the first time, I guess I haven't ever really been an explorer type. I'm not, I played in my backyard at the beach, but I've never felt completely free in nature. And it was this idea, like this notion of just running with my eyes closed into the distance that was pretty powerful. Also, funnily, the whole shoot was really upset that I was ruining the Salt Lake crust. I felt this I have to be really careful when we're ruining it. And then later they told me they do car races on the lake all the time. And I was like, the whole time.
Fabulous. Now, Tim, for yourself, is there a particular experience?
A bit like Chris, there have been many. I think being stalked by polar bears out on the Arctic ice is an interesting experience. And again, it's a really humbling experience. But you know what? It's how you frame it. You think, this is this animal's territory, I'm in it. They don't eat fish and berries, they eat seals that are roughly the same size as me, and it's kind of the order of things. So, but I think the most profound one, we went to Mount Kenya last year. I took the senior executive of the World Bank up the mountain to show them the melting glaciers. But at the base of the mountain is the Olpechida Conservancy, where Attenborough's charity runs it. And they have the last two remaining northern white rhino there, which is a subspecies of rhino. And the two left are females, and so evidently, unfortunately, unless IVF is magicked out of somewhere, that's the end of that species. And I can remember first getting involved in the environment movement, probably my first memories of maybe 25, 30 years ago, of people saying, well, you know, at least there are 300 of these northern white rhino left. It's still a viable breeding population. We should be okay if we can just sort of stop the rot. And, you know, if you'd had that conversation turn of the century, in the 1900s, there would have been 2,000 or 3,000 of them left. And even, my point is that even though it was in the public domain, the plight of these animals, each person has stood aside and allowed it to happen. You know, evil flourishes when good people do nothing, as they say. And, you know, we've all just sort of rather allowed it to happen on our watch. And it's really a metaphor for so many other things in the world. You know, none of us think that the carbon we emit is the carbon that's contributing to the climate issue. And of course, each of us has the same feeling, and collectively we're doing tremendous damage to this place. And I really looked at these animals thinking, you know, what a sad experience. They're under guard, and you know, the last 100 or so have been taken despite them having 20 heavily armed human guards around them, and people will go to almost any lengths to try and get to these poor creatures. They were there with a southern white rhino, and her role was to teach them how to graze again, because these two northern whites had actually been born in captivity, and they were learning how to graze. And at least their final days will be out on the savannah, living a kind of an inverted commas natural life.
My goodness. So, Chris, what do you think the critical thing about the human connection with nature is?
The critical thing, to me, the critical issue, so the absolutely, if there was one overwhelming issue, it's ignorance. It's that lack of connection brought about by just lack of understanding and lack of knowledge. So Jacques Cousteau once famously said that you can't save what you don't know. You can't save what you don't love. You can't love what you don't know. And so you have to build that relationship. Sorry, Jacques. So you have to build that relationship through engagement and spending time directly with nature. But you also need to learn about it, and that can be structured or unstructured. It can be built on your personal experience from your knowledge, but you have to learn about it. And because learning about it gives you that great understanding that, one, we know so little, and secondly, it's incredibly marvellous, and everything is wonderful to do. So how we choose to learn, and learning through experience is probably the most powerful form of learning, and positive experiences give you all of those life strategies that we talked about tonight. But you also learn by being guided by really important people. And we have lots out there in television land who do all sorts of weird and wonderful things with nature, which are mostly about themselves, you know, and they want to get from point A to point B wearing only their underpants and eating the heads off bats and things like that, because it's about being super macho often. And, you know, there are some terrible learnings about life. There's a program about the 78 most dangerous species of animals in Australia, and one of them on the picture actually features a sugar glider, and you go, well, look, if we're killed by sugar gliders, it's a fair cop, you know, it's not going to happen there. But it's who we look to for guidance, and there's been a lot of really good sociological work that suggests that when we don't know what to do, we look to role models, and if those role models are really good, then they will guide us magnificently. And the most important role models are really positive people, really full of enthusiasm, happiness, the joy of being outside. And I remember being profoundly influenced as a kid reading Gerald Durrell's My Family and Other Animals, and then all of his books. And if you read it, it just drips just joy and wonder of collecting beetles and flies and just living on Corfu. But it was all in your backyard, and you can do that. And you can go out and find things under a rock and have worms in the worm farm, and then the lawn clippings pile at the back, and it's enormous fun. But he was really positive. And we have a few really positive leaders who educate us, but who just exude joy of being there, and who also show respect for nature. I'm looking at two right here. So we should be listening to you in the way you do it. David Attenborough has obviously captured this, magnificently, and perhaps not everything he says is technically, scientifically correct, but it's full of the joy of nature and the respect for it. So the one thing we could do is you get outside and learn through your experience, but find mentors, find leaders and guides who share that joy and that wonder. And those are the people everybody can watch. So go home and watch David Attenborough is really what I'm saying. It's a great way to start.
Absolutely. Now, Sarah, what do you think the critical thing is about the human connection with nature?
I think it's critically we need to get our children back outside. We really need to do something with our children. I am really concerned about the technology and, the 24/7 and, PlayStation that is taking out the unstructured play outside, and that, the children don't have the opportunity to have the creeks, as I've said before, even, the playgrounds, the trees, that is vanishing from our parklands and our council playgrounds and that. So I think it's really critical that we get these children now, because all of us have those experiences, and if we don't teach them now, will they ever be able to understand the knowledge that we have as adults? So we need to get into our children now.
So more green time and less screen time.
Yes, Sophie. Yes, parents.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
For kids and adults alike.
Yes.
What do you think the critical thing that we can change?
Okay, well, I think, look, when nature is gone, so are we. So we're so incredibly dependent on it, and our ecosystems are in collapse. Like I was talking about some of the positive things back home, but the possums are extinct throughout the Southern Flinders Ranges and the Northern Flinders Ranges now, which is kind of hard to believe if you live in Adelaide and think about the robustness of like a possum. So, our environment is in collapse, and I think hearing some of the conversation talking about what we've been valuing during COVID, so it's relationships, it's friendships, it's time with family, and time walking, the beach or the park. So I think it's, again, about status. It's what's valued and what's kind of promoted as being valuable. And I think if it's not already, affluence very soon is going to become incredibly gross. Like wealth will be, I think it's going to be looked down upon. So it's about, I think, how do we shift our values so that protecting nature is the kind of highest goal.
Wonderful words. Erin, what would you say is the most critical thing about, the human connection to nature?
It might be an unusual response, but I've been thinking a lot about how, we definitely need positive role models, but also I think socially we don't have stewards for discomfort, for death. We're a culture that doesn't, really look upon death, discomfort, the darkness of Mother Earth as well. And if you look at nature, cycles of death are happening on a daily basis. When you garden, you connect with that. And yet I think our disconnect with discomfort and our kind of focus on quick satisfaction, some of that wealth focus kind of thing. How do we actually go through cycles of grief, of mourning of the planet, when we don't have stewards that take us through that in our lives as well? So, and I think the world is going to go through a lot of situations which require an ability to grieve. The bushfires, we were all going through a collective grief, and yet that's not something we do in our culture very often. So I'm not sure if that's a very clear answer, but it's something I've been thinking a lot about.
Okay. Tim, for yourself, what do you think the critical thing about the human connection with nature is?
Well, I think the first thing for us to accept is that we just can't do without it. I think we tend to think that we can. The whole conversation, if it wasn't a group of people who knew a bit more than perhaps your average person, would be around the fact that there's human societal side of things and nature is sort of out there, it's separate, but of course we are part of it. We need it for spiritual, developmental benefits to us, of course. But we need it for all of the things that it provides. It cleans the water and the air that we breathe and sequesters the carbon we insist on continuing to emit. So we need it. We just cannot exist without it. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it's up to each one of us to make a stand and do something about it. I mean, there is no sort of us and them, it's just us. And we are the ones responsible for doing more, and the way we live and the food we eat and the way we travel around and how we heat and light and cool our homes are the things, and invest our money, dare I say it, are the things that will decide the way the future looks for our children and indeed for the plants and animals we share the planet with. So it's up to each of us to really make a difference and not just acquiesce and accept that society dictates the way things have always been done, because evidently the way things have always been done has not served us very well. So we need to all step up and take action.
And if there was one thing you could suggest to people that they could do, right now, either in the next couple of days or make it their one thing.
Plant a tree.
Plant a tree.
Plant a tree.
Plant many.
Plant many trees. Best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. It's really just understanding that each of us has a role to play. Most people can decarbonise their lives if that's something we want to talk about. They can do most of those things inside a week. They can start walking to work, eating less meat. They can go to green power at home. They can reinvest their superannuation in something that doesn't invest in fossil fuels. Much of those decisions can be made pretty much with a click of a mouse or a phone call or just a change in a decision. Those things can be done very, very quickly. I think getting involved in a project and making it your own and protecting a particular bit of the planet is a really good way to go. If each of us picked a particular thing that we were prepared to act as the steward for, the world would be a far better place.
And if people are, say, living in a tiny little courtyard in a city or even in a little apartment with a balcony, there are lots of projects they can get involved with, aren't there?
You can grow saplings. You can grow 100 saplings, native saplings, to rebuild the habitat that we should have in this country, regardless of the terrible fire season we've just had. Australia is the country with the 5th largest land area for tree planting in the world. We've got 58 million hectares of trees, where if we all planted trees and reforested this planet to the way it was before we started taking trees out at the rate we did, we would buy ourselves 20 years in the fight against climate change, and we'd re-establish all the biodiversity we've been losing. And an individual living in an apartment can grow 100 saplings and then give them to someone who's got the land to plant them, and we can start rebuilding.
Wonderful. Erin, have you got something you'd encourage people to do, one thing? Maybe it's to do the...
Look up tree pose for the planet.
Yeah.
Take a picture of themselves in tree pose, and they're welcome to donate as well to keep that going. But at the moment, we're planting trees for every tree pose. Yeah.
Wonderful.
And move out in nature.
And move and get outside in nature. Yeah. Jared, is there one thing you'd encourage everyone to do?
To have a sense of entitlement to a right to a clean planet, a safe and clean planet, and to carry that sense of entitlement into how you vote. So to really be lobbying governments and having that real structural change. Like, I think I agree with those individual efforts, but I think, you look at the greenhouse emissions, etc. It's by a select and very small group of people on this planet rather than the individual. So I think looking for that kind of more structural change and voting and insisting to our leaders that we require change.
Great words. Sarah, what would you say?
That our children have a voice with all of this too. I think as adults we do a lot of the speaking, and I think that our children, are very competent and capable, young beings, and that they have a voice for the environment as well, and that we empower them.
And actually kids, when you get them young and you take them outside, they are the ones that are fascinated by the bug, and let them have snails in a jar on the kitchen table and watch how amazing snails are. Or, kids have got a fascination and an awe that comes to them naturally.
And we take it away from them.
We do tend to take it away from them. And we need to get that back. We need to see, the beauty of a butterfly turn from a chrysalis which happened on my kitchen table today. An Australian admiral, you know, came out of its chrysalis and we were able to take it outside. And sometimes people think, oh, you know, you do that for your children. I do that for me, you know, because every butterfly is extraordinary. And then even just putting them on a flower and letting them feel the bit of the breeze today. I didn't do it when it was raining. So, Chris, what's the one thing you tell people to do?
One thing that everybody should do, to my way of thinking, is to channel their inner 2-year-old. Ask why, and be fearless about asking why. Why are we down to 2 rhinos? You know, why don't we know more about Aboriginal culture and their connection? Why don't we tell more stories? Why? Why is this happening, and what are we doing about it? And we should be never afraid to ask our leaders, our bosses, our teachers, our parents, everyone who we connect with, why is this happening and what can we do about it? And there is hope too. I mean, there's an enormous set of opportunities, and we've talked about a whole mass of things around creating conservation and survival of species and ecosystems. And they're growing, the number of things we're doing are growing every day. There's things you can do in your backyards and your little patios, through to getting involved with groups, through understanding rewilding, translocation, preservation of remnant habitat, restoration of degraded land, thinking about what you're eating, what you're doing with your plastics, are you recycling? There's a lot that can be done that you can participate with. So what can I do to help? Why should I be helping? These are all sorts of comments that people have passed. But asking questions and demanding answers is really important. And I think we've started to see that happen, and that puts pressure on our leaders to know some answers. Don't ever accept you shouldn't be asking those questions. Go back and study ancient Greek or something, because somehow that's helpful. These are really vital questions for the survival of the planet and therefore the survival of humans. Although ironically, I think humans can probably survive without much of the planet because we're one of those sorts of species. But we have to be asking those questions, and we should be encouraging, if not demanding, everybody to ask why.
It can often seem a bit overwhelming and a bit negative. And as you said, there are lots of simple things. So tonight's event, this wonderful panel discussion, is part of Nature Festival South Australia, and that continues to run till Sunday. So I would encourage all the viewers at home to get onto the naturefestival.org.au website and look up the other events that are going on. There's another fabulous one tomorrow night, which is In Conversation, Everyday Nature in Extraordinary Times, and that's a Zoom-type presentation that goes from 6:30 to 7:30. And it's actually going to be talking about how have people connected with nature during lockdown, which is what we've mentioned on, how has nature cared for people during lockdown. So there's all this fabulous stuff out there. There's so many organisations looking for volunteers, looking for people to grow plants, looking for people to plant plants, looking for people to manage weeds. So, you know, there's lots of ways you can get involved. But right now, for the next couple of days, head to naturefestival.org.au. So I would like to thank you all for your insight, for your sharing, for your wisdom and for your inspiration. And it has been a fantastic panel discussion. Got quite deep and which is what we wanted. So it has been the nature of nature, story, science and soul. Thank you for joining us, and get outside and get into it.